Dongkyung is an ordinary woman struggling to survive her everyday life. However, everything changes when she's told she's running out of time and accidentally summons a mysterious man who exists to destroy the world. Now, what starts as a dangerous deal quickly turns into something much more intense, as the two get way too close and can't stop themselves from falling for each other. The story begins when Dongkyung, an editor, is diagnosed with cancer and given less than a year to live. Despite the shocking news, her main concern remains work, and on her way out of the hospital, she bumps into Myulmang, the harbinger of doom. Shortly after, news breaks about a man who stabbed several people. When the attacker is brought into the hospital, Myulmang pretends to be a doctor and heals him instantly, telling him that staying alive is his punishment. Later, Myulmang goes to the hospital rooftop, where he speaks with his boss Shin, who is a deity, and she reminds him that it's his birthday, the only day he's allowed to grant a human's wish. Meanwhile, Dongkyung discovers that her boyfriend is married and his wife is pregnant. Although she tries to explain that she had no idea, the wife refuses to believe her. Dongkyung returns to work, where her awful boss, Changshin, scolds her for being late. To make matters worse, he discovers a video accusing Dongkyung of being a mistress. She denies the accusations and decides to take the day off without permission. On her way home, she encounters a creep and chases him into the street, where he suddenly falls into a sinkhole, thanks to Myulmang's presence. That night, her younger brother, Dongkyung, calls to ask for money, forgetting that it's their parents' death anniversary. Frustrated, Dongkyung hangs up and prepares to observe the memorial alone. After losing their parents at a young age, Dongkyung took responsibility for her brother and forced herself never to cry again, in order not to appear weak. Later, Dongkyung receives a message from her ex-boyfriend, Daehan, and a notice demanding payment for her loans. Overwhelmed by everything, she drunkenly wishes upon a shooting star for the world to be doomed. Out of all the wishes made that night, Myulmang chooses hers and appears in her house like a cultured stalker. He tells her that she has exactly 100 days to live and asks her to make a wish. Unable to process the bizarre situation, Dongkyung says nothing, and he leaves after promising to return. Believing it was all a dream, Dongkyung goes to sleep, only to wake up inside Myulmang's house, where he explains that he entered her dream. He reminds her that she called for him when she wished for the world's destruction, as he's the embodiment of doom. Refusing to believe him, Dongkyung tries to leave but finds herself in the middle of nowhere. With a snap of his fingers, Myulmang changes their surroundings and explains that he needs her help to destroy the world because he has tried it alone and failed. But since humans have more authority than he does, he hopes to use Dongkyung's wish. Shortly after, Dongkyung wakes up again, thinking it was just a dream, but she panics when she notices footsteps in her home. As she goes about her day, Myulmang continues to appear wherever she goes, asking her to work with him. On a crowded train, Dongkyung briefly wishes for everyone to disappear, and Myulmang grants her wish for a moment, confirming that he's real, but still, she refuses to accept it. At work, Myulmang shows up disguised as a writer, forcing Dongkyung to storm out of the office to avoid him. But she finds him across the other end of the road, and she suddenly collapses in the middle of the road due to intense pain. Just as Truck-kun heads straight towards her for another isekai mission, time suddenly stops. Myulmang approaches Dongkyung and tells her to make a deal with him or die. Left with no other choice, Dongkyung takes his hand, as the countdown to the end of her life begins. As Dongkyung takes his hand, time rewinds to a few minutes earlier, and Myulmang holds her until they reach safety. Even after witnessing all that, she still struggles to believe his true identity, so he messes with the electricity and even summons a meteor shower, finally convincing her. Just then, he senses that the serial attacker from earlier is about to murk himself. But before leaving, Myulmang ties a red rope around Dongkyung's wrist to ease the pain of her illness, explaining that she must hold his hand before midnight every day to recharge it. Afterward, he casually strolls into the prison and stops the serial attacker who is being tormented by relentless voices. Meanwhile, Dongkyung goes to visit her best friend, Gina, a web novelist, to share what she experienced, only to find her struggling with writing. Though everyone at work criticizes Gina's work as terrible, Dongkyung keeps that to herself. Later, Dongkyung's doctor, Sungjun, calls to remind her about the surgery, but she refuses. Meanwhile, Myulmang visits the hospital to report Dongkyung's wish to Shin, but her indifferent response leaves him disappointed, as she simply tells him to do whatever he wants. Before he leaves, Shin warns that he'll face consequences if he does anything wrong. but Myulmang brushes it off, believing his very existence is already punishment enough. Meanwhile, Dongkyung rushes back to her office to confront her scumbag ex-boyfriend, who's staging a protest and accusing her of seducing him. It turns out his wife filed for divorce after meeting Dongkyung, and now he's shifting the blame onto her. Thankfully, Dongkyung's co-workers step in and toss him out like trash. When he tries to come back, his wife shows up to drag him away and apologizes to everyone on his behalf. Ashamed of the chaos caused by her scumbag ex, Dongkyung tries to resign, but her co-worker Joik informs her that their boss is away on a trip with his girlfriend, leaving no one to approve it. On her way home, Dongkyung hesitates at a crosswalk, still shaken by what happened earlier that day. Just then, Myulmang appears and helps her safely across. When she questions him about the terms of their contract, he finally reveals that if she doesn't make a wish, someone she loves will die. Shocked, Dongkyung lashes out, angry that he withheld such a crucial detail before she agreed to the deal. So, Myulmang places her back in front of the oncoming truck to test whether she'll make a different choice, but Dongkyung chooses the same path, leaving him satisfied. Furious at being toyed with, she slaps him, yet he doesn't retaliate. That night, Sungkyung returns home, and Dongkyung grows emotional, realizing her brother could die if she because of the contract with Myulmang. The following day, she heads to work frustrated and takes it out on a creepy writer named Jijo. After this, she decides to hang out with Gina, who's considering quitting her job as a writer, and blames her ex-boyfriend, Hyunkyu, who just happens to be a rich cafe owner. At Hyunkyu's cafe, Dongkyung's co-workers agree not to bring up her dating life. But at the office, Joik, her aloof, blunt co-worker, suddenly asks about it, and Dongkyung explains everything to him. She then considers making a list of what to do with her remaining days, but realizes she's too broke to play 16 wishes. Meanwhile, Myulmang goes to the hospital to see his boss, Shin, who's currently occupying a failing body. After her resuscitation, Myulmang wonders why she's always sick or dying in every lifetime. She explains that it's the price to pay for the world to exist, and apparently, she's always born the moment a lot of people call for her help because of the destruction Myulmang brings. Shin then makes a bet that Dongkyung will not wish for doom again, but Myulmang believes he can convince her to do it, so he drives to a photo studio where Dongkyung is taking her memorial photos. On the way home, he takes her hand to recharge the bracelet, and Dongkyung notices a report on multiple accidents. Myulmang explains that it's because of his existence, and every breath he takes causes something to fall into ruin. Even when he decides to do nothing, the world falls into chaos, and natural disasters become rampant. Later, Dongkyung's drunk ex-boyfriend, Daehan, begs her to take him back, but Myulmang intervenes and pretends to be her husband to mess with him. But Sungkyung soon arrives and chases Daehan off while Dongkyung sadly picks up her broken memorial photo. She cuts herself in the process, but Myulmang heals her instantly and thanks her for thinking about him in her worst moment. Before he can leave, she suddenly proposes they live together, which amuses him. After Dongkyung's parents died, no one wanted to take her and her brother in except for her mother's twin sister, Suja. Back in the present, Myulmang accepts Dongkyung's proposal without hesitation, making her regret her decision. But before she can change her mind, she's shocked to discover that her home has somehow merged with Myulmang's home. He wonders if she has feelings for him, which made her want to live with him. But Dongkyung denies it, explaining that it's because he's special and she didn't want him to suddenly disappear. Just then, she overhears Sungkyung's voice and opens a door to find him outside her house, calling their aunt, Suja, who now lives abroad. After the call, Dongkyung asks about Daehan, and Sungkyung reveals that he was hit by a car while running away. But Sungkyung doesn't blame his sister for dating a married dude because he knows she's usually gullible to anyone nice to her. He then storms inside to deal with Myulmang and finds him shamelessly lying on her bed. After learning they only pretended to be dating to fool Daehan, Sungkyung proposes going on a drinking spree to find out Myulmang's true intentions. But he gets drunk first, and Myulmang wins him over. The moment Sungkyung leaves, Myulmang merges the house with his again, leaving Dongkyung stunned. He then asks about Sungkyung, wondering if he's the one Dongkyung loves the most. But she denies it and warns him not to touch her brother, after which she falls asleep talking to him. Myulmang copies her even though he doesn't need to eat or sleep. While sleeping, she dreams about her parents and seeing Myulmang at their funeral. But when she wakes up, he denies entering her dream. She then writes the terms of their contract, And apparently, Myulmang promised to grant her one real wish, after which she has to wish for the end of the world. At work, Dongkyung is unable to focus, and Myulmang somehow types out a message on her computer, which her coworker, Yeji, finds strange. And he continues to do so even during lunch, so Dongkyung rushes home only to learn he was just messing with her. Meanwhile, Myulmang goes to the hospital and hypnotizes a woman to see her reaction after getting diagnosed with cancer, like Dongkyung. She cries profusely and asks to be saved, which causes Myulmang to wonder why Dongkyung acted indifferently to the news. Elsewhere, Dongkyung consoles a failing BL writer named Siberia, who has just lost his grandfather. On her way out, she bumps into Shin and suddenly gets a vision of Myulmang. At the bus stop, Shin tries to take Dongkyung's bracelet, but Myulmang suddenly appears and drags Dongkyung away. However, she refuses to leave and reveals that she once saw him crying profusely at a funeral hall, even though he lied that he never had any feelings. Though Myulmang denies it, Shin is quite pleased to hear about it. Back home, Myulmang is overly worried about Dongkyung and advises her never to let anyone touch her bracelet. This only makes her suspect he might have feelings for her. Later, she holds his hand to recharge and finds herself staring at him, but quickly runs off when he suddenly turns to face her. Dongkyung then asks why he cried at the funeral hall, and Myulmang reveals it is because he lost his mother that day. The following day, Shin shows up unannounced to tease Myulmang for crying, making it clear she was the one who died back then. He then begs her not to hurt Dongkyung since she's already dying. To protect Dongkyung, Myulmang goes to her office, disguised as her boss, and gives her a bunch of work. Dongkyung has no choice but to send Joik to replace her at a meeting with Gina. At the meeting, Joik bluntly roasts Gina's work, especially her male characters, which she always bases on her ex-boyfriend, Hyunkyu, who so happens to be her pen name. Back at work, Dongkyung makes Myulmang assist her, but they end up arguing. She then tells him how she suddenly remembered seeing him crying after bumping into someone at the funeral hall. Realizing Shin is trying to ruin his plans, Myulmang storms out to confront her, but she lets him know that his growing feelings for Dongkyung might interfere with his plans before she does. However, Myulmang refuses to believe he will ever have any compassion or save Dongkyung. To prove himself, Myulmang visits Dongkyung and refuses to recharge her bracelet. Instead, he watches her experience pain and tries to make her use up her free wish, but when Dongkyung refuses to budge, he has no choice but to hold her hand, easing her pain. After that, he tells her not to expect any feelings from him since he plans to make her miserable until she wishes for the destruction of the world. Undeterred by his tough act, Dongkyung boldly jumps off the wall to challenge him, but Myulmang saves her, convincing her that he has feelings. Determined to go against him, Dongkyung declares that her plan is to make him the person she loves the most, so that he'll not be able to hurt her brother. Surprisingly, Myulmang agrees to her proposal and even eggs her on. He suggests starting with a kiss, but Dongkyung shoves him off and promises to make him miserable. As part of her plan to fall in love with him, Dongkyung suggests they sleep next to each other. To make her change her mind, he invites her to sleep in his room instead, but to his surprise, Dongkyung complies and falls asleep right next to him. While watching her sleep, Myulmang finds himself drawn to her, but remembering his determination never to care about her, he storms out of the room. The following morning, while listening to humans complain about their lives, Myulmang smirks, convinced he can never feel compassion for such vile creatures as Shin wishes. Later, Dongkyung asks the love guru, Google, to teach her how to fall in love, and when she sees an article written by Gina, Dongkyung meets up with her to ask for her help. But Gina explains that she fell in love at first sight with Hyunkyu because he smelled of fresh soap. She even blames Dongkyung for being an accomplice because she met Dongkyung for the first time during a school trip. And Dongkyung sold her booze, which made her so drunk that she boldly confessed her feelings to Hyunkyu in public. Gina then suggests that Dongkyung dream about her love target, which should make things easier. Dongkyung agrees and promises to tell Gina about her mystery man in 3 months. As they continue to chat about first loves, Gina regrets never kissing Hyunkyu but reveals that her first kiss was with Joik. Dongkyung finds this unbelievable, and later at work, she keeps stealing glances at Joik until he asks her about it. But Dongkyung refuses to say anything and simply asks if he has fallen in love with someone he hates. Joik replies that he has only kissed someone he hates because he pitied her. As soon as Dongkyung leaves, Joik takes the elevator to the top floor, where he meets Hyunkyu, revealing that they're actually best friends who live together in the building. Hyunkyu tells Joik about his upcoming school reunion and swears he's not going because of Gina. Hyunkyu claims he doesn't even remember what she looks like, but the next moment, he pulls out a photo of a potential date that looks like a stand-in for Gina, making it clear he never forgot about her. Meanwhile, Myulmang suddenly appears on Dongkyung's train ride to hold her hand and even offers to help her on the walk home. However, Dongkyung finds his sudden kindness suspicious. Myulmang then explains that he was out listening to people's minds and concluded that they don't love anyone else but themselves. He declares that he wants to see how she intends to fall for him to the point of giving up everything for him. Later, Dongkyung even watches a few movies for pointers on how to fall for a special being, but that doesn't work, so she invites Myulmang to her dream to test out Gina's advice. In her dream, she makes Myulmang create a bunch of cheesy first love scenarios, but none of them makes her heart flutter, so Dongkyung suggests he show her his world. After warning her that his world is not as pretty as hers, Myulmang takes Dongkyung to a beautiful field which suddenly withers with each step he takes. But instead of fear, Dongkyung feels sad for him and understands that Myulmang refuses to love anything because his very existence makes whatever he loves disappear. As Dongkyung takes a step towards Myulmang and holds his hand, the dead field comes back to life, leaving him surprised. Refusing to be influenced by her, Myulmang pulls away, abruptly ending the dream. Later, he tries to talk about the dream, but Dongkyung brushes it off, claiming she forgives him for ruining it. Unable to accept defeat, he goes to complain to Shin, who believes Dongkyung is starting to move Myulmang's heart. Back home, Dongkyung is unable to stop thinking about Myulmang and concludes that Gina's advice actually worked. Unfortunately, her deadbeat brother ruins the moment when he visits to ask for money for another failed venture. As they start to argue, Sungkyung accuses Dongkyung of not having any dreams, but she reminds him that it's because she has to care for him. However, this only makes Sungkyung annoyed, and as the situation escalates, Dongkyung mistakenly hits him. Myulmang witnesses the whole drama and tries to mock Dongkyung about it. But she refuses to indulge him until he threatens to harm Sungkyung. This makes her so mad that she wishes for Myulmang to die and experience how she feels. To fulfill her wish, he creates an illusion and hands her a gun to murk him, but when she hesitates, Myulmang shoots himself to show her that he can't die. So Dongkyung vows to find a way to make him live in misery for all eternity, and Myulmang accepts the challenge. After that, Myulmang heads to the court, leaving behind chaos as he goes. At the court, the serial attacker is sentenced to life imprisonment, but he begs the judge for a death sentence. Back home, Dongkyung frantically rushes out when she receives a call that her brother is in the hospital. This reminds her of how she got a similar call when her parents passed away. But at the hospital, Sungkyung only suffers a minor injury while the serial attacker tries to escape police custody. Unfortunately, he trips and hits his head on a wall in the process. At the hospital, Dongkyung's doctor, Sung-jun, sees Myulmang on the edge of the roof and, thinking he's trying to exit life, tries to talk him down. To his shock, Myulmang jumps off, but Sung-jun doesn't see any brain splatters below, leaving him puzzled. Just then, Dongkyung arrives at the hospital only to overhear Sungkyung's plan to make her feel guilty. Infuriated, she storms off, and Sungkyung chases after her, but he's stopped by Sung-jun. Outside, Dongkyung runs into Myulmang, and at the same time, the serial attacker's ambulance arrives in front of the hospital. As soon as the door opens, he grabs a surgical blade and tries to attack Myulmang, but Dongkyung blocks it. However, Myulmang holds the blade with his hand, preventing it from touching her. Meanwhile, Sungkyung breaks down after learning about his sister's condition. With only a glare, Myulmang makes the serial attacker murk himself, after which he reminds Dongkyung that no one can love him, as everyone who knows him only resents him. However, Dongkyung worries about him, and Myulmang scolds her for jumping in to save him. But Dongkyung lets him know that she doesn't regret doing it. Even when he tries to scare her off by reminding her that he's the big bad wolf, Dongkyung still chooses to trust his decision, which only frustrates Myulmang. Just then, Sungkyung arrives, bawling his eyes out and apologizing to Dongkyung for being a brat. Later, he thanks Myulmang for taking care of his sister and happily gives them his blessing to be together before leaving. But as soon as he gets away from them, Sungkyung starts crying again and decides to turn over a new leaf. He ends up applying for a job at a cafe, and Hyunkyu hires him on the spot. Back home, Dongkyung watches the news about the serial attacker and learns he died from blood loss. She tries to make Myulmang admit he did it because he cared, but Myulmang refuses to show any sign of what he considers weakness. He hurriedly disappears before Dongkyung can press any further. As he relives the scene where she saved him, Shin appears and questions why he protected Dongkyung. Myulmang explains that he only did it because he couldn't end the world without Dongkyung's wish, but Shin refuses to believe him. Myulmang is also curious about why Dongkyung truly saved him, so he returns home to ask about it, but Dongkyung has no answer for him, and he can no longer read her mind because of their contract. Dongkyung then suggests he observe her and learn the truth like other humans. So she takes him out to learn, but Myulmang ends up using his mind-reading skills on everyone instead of learning what they might be thinking from observing them. She then suggests giving him a human name, but Myulmang refuses, and in the process, the two end up in each other's arms. Deciding to observe Dongkyung properly, Myulmang shows up to her workplace disguised as her co-worker, Jungmin. He continues to pester her, causing Joik and her co-workers to suspect that Dongkyung might be dating Jungmin. Dongkyung tries to explain herself, but during lunch, Myulmang's clinginess only makes things worse. On their train ride home, he helps her secure a seat to show her that he has been learning to observe what she's thinking without reading her mind. Dongkyung commends him and suggests he find another seat, but Myulmang refuses because he wants to continue observing her. Dongkyung then posts an encouraging comment on Gina's web novel, and Gina is excited when she sees it. But the next moment, her smile vanishes as soon as she reads the negative comments, which remind her of Joik's criticism. Meanwhile, Joik is also checking Gina's web novel when Hyunkyu arrives and reveals that Joik's parents actually own the whole building, but he doesn't want his co-workers to know that he's rich. Hyunkyu then grabs Joik's tablet and reads a bit of Gina's story. Without knowing she's writing about him, he decides that the male character is a scumbag, which Joik agrees with because he knows the truth. The following day, Changshin calls for a meeting all the way from the Maldives to scold his employees for messing up their most popular writer's episode, but Dongkyung takes the blame even though she didn't do it. After the meeting, Dayan, who made the mistake, apologizes to Dongkyung privately. Later, Dongkyung meets with the writer, Park-young, who happens to be a bratty high schooler, and begs him to forgive them. To please him, she takes him to a restaurant only to see Myulmang disguised as a waiter. As Dongkyung butters up Park-young, Myulmang is annoyed and refuses to serve them, so Dongkyung has no choice but to rush to a convenience store to buy the brat more treats. But by the time she arrives, Myulmang has already annoyed him into leaving. On her way back, Myulmang appears out of nowhere to give his feedback after observing her. He concludes that she's just broke and suggests she make a wish to be rich, but Dongkyung refuses and vows to use her wish for a good cause. Seeing how sad Dongkyung looks, Myulmang suddenly takes her to her favorite seaside from her hometown, making her happy. Dongkyung reveals that she came here to cry whenever she was sad, and Myulmang almost comforts her but holds himself back. As the atmosphere between them suddenly tenses, Dongkyung suggests they kiss, and Myulmang tries to grant her request. But she pulls away at the last minute, and as Myulmang takes her hand, she finds herself back home in an instant. Embarrassed by their near saliva exchange, Dongkyung refuses to look him in the eye. The following day, Gina heads to the hairdresser's for a haircut because she heard Hyunkyu is also coming to the reunion. Apparently, he broke up with her via a measly text and ghosted her after going abroad, so she plans to show him that she's doing well. At work, Dongkyung is unable to focus because of the near-kiss incident with Myulmang. Elsewhere, Joik gives Gina a proposal to help her get over using her ex-boyfriend as a reference for her web novels. As Gina hesitates, Joik notices her new hair, and, suspecting she's trying to impress Hyunkyu, he tells her not to attend the reunion and let go of Hyunkyu, which is the only way to help her novels. That night, Dongkyung returns home and bumps into Myulmang heading out for work, so she decides to tag along. He takes her to watch an old wedding tradition which is about to be forgotten, explaining that it's his job to watch over the end of everything. To comfort him, Dongkyung reminds Myulmang that the end always ushers in a new beginning. Moved by her words, Myulmang practically begs Dongkyung to be the first human to love him. He explains that it's the only way for her to live, but Dongkyung isn't happy to hear this. Even though she wanted nothing but to destroy Myulmang from the beginning, Dongkyung's heart towards him has changed. So she decides to start avoiding him, but his presence makes it impossible, and that night, he reminds her to fall in love with him so that he can die in her place. The following day, Myulmang meets Shin to discuss his progress, but she makes him uneasy when she reminds him that things may not go as he planned. Meanwhile, Dongkyung discovers that her deadbeat brother has finally landed a decent job, and they finally talk things out, after which Sungkyung apologizes for being a pain in her peaches. Dongkyung is beginning to look forward to her last days when she learns that her bratty writer, Parkyung, has ghosted them again. So she takes out her frustration at a batting cage while complaining to Gina. After that, Gina reveals that she plans to give up her obsession with Hyunkyu, and she's shocked when Dongkyung tells her that Juik kissed her in the past only because he pitied her. So she calls him to meet up and questions if he only offered to work with her because he pitied her. But Juik denies it and lets her know that his proposal is based on her competence. Gina finally agrees to accept his proposal, and Juik promises she won't regret her decision. Later, Dongkyung runs into Myulmang, who grabs her hand and starts acting nice as part of his ploy to make her fall for him. However, Dongkyung tells him to cut it out as she's decided to find another scumbag to die in her place. As the two quarrel like lovers, Sungkyung joins them and gives Myulmang pointers on how to win over his sister. The following day, Dongkyung makes Sungkyung do a full-body checkup to make sure her condition is not genetic. Dr. Sungjun then advises Dongkyung to get treatment and live a few months longer, and even gives her pain meds. On her way out, Dongkyung runs into Shin and recognizes her as the girl from the bus stop, and after a brief chat, Shin hands her a toy capsule. Dongkyung then heads back inside the hospital to remind Sungjun about his submission deadlines because, apart from being a doctor, he's also a writer for Dongkyung's company. Suddenly, Myulmang appears and shoves a bouquet into her hands. Sungjun mistakes him for her youngest brother, since everyone perceives Myulmang differently. When Sungkyung arrives, they take a photo, and Dongkyung finally sees how Myulmang appears in his eyes. When she asks Myulmang about it, he reveals that she's the only one who can see his real face, call for him, and even give him a name. The fact that she's his first when it comes to a lot of things makes Dongkyung's heart flutter a bit. Just then, she forces Myulmang to stop the car when she notices Parkyung in public, debuting in a reality show. Parkyung sees her in the crowd but feigns ignorance. However, he texts her later to tell her about it, ignoring the fact that they're expecting his next chapter upload. She begs Myulmang to help her eliminate him, but refuses since it's not a wish. The following day, Dongkyung asks her coworkers about choosing a dying wish, and everyone picks money, disappointing her. Thinking she's in heat and must need some TLC, Yeji sets her up on a blind date with her boyfriend's best friend when Dongkyung was expecting a scumbag she could sentence to death in her place. To Dongkyung's surprise, Myulmang shows up disguised as Yeji's boyfriend. After forcing Yeji and the blind date to pass out, Myulmang drags Dongkyung out. Like a total pick-me, he tells Dongkyung to make a wish to fall in love with him instead of hunting for scumbags like free-range chickens. Dongkyung doubts he can grant such a wish, so Myulmang somehow bitwitches her into falling for him to prove himself, but this only angers Dongkyung. Meanwhile, as Juik helps Gina work on switching up her male characters, he makes her heart flutter when he suddenly brushes off dirt from her face. On his way out, he notices the umbrella Gina held the day he kissed her. He asks why she didn't throw it away, but Gina is too shocked to answer, so Juik decides to take it with him since it belongs to him. After he leaves, she rushes to the school reunion only to discover she's the only girl in attendance. Soon, Hyunkyu joins them, but Gina avoids his gaze, and after the reunion, he offers her a ride, which she refuses, so he helps her hail a taxi. After returning home, Juik asks about the reunion, but Hyunkyu refuses to talk about it because of Gina. The following day, Dongkyung continues to think about what happened between her and Myulmang. She asks Juik about making a dying wish to a handsome guy, and Juik suggests wishing for a passionate relationship. Later, she runs into Myulmang at the bus stop, and he grabs her hand to do the classic running through the rain romantic trope. But Dongkyung runs out of breath and hates the fact that she got wet because reality is nothing like the soapy fictions, but Myulmang somehow turns it into a teachable moment to let her know that life isn't all that bad. And for some reason, Dongkyung is inspired and finally wishes for him to fall in love with her. Myulmang informs her that she can't wish for that, but still passionately locks lips with her. At the same time, Shin makes up her mind to delete anything that messes with how she's programmed things. Suddenly, Myulmang pulls away from Dongkyung and vanishes, leaving her puzzled. She panics and rushes back home, but doesn't find him there or anything relating to him. The next day, Dongkyung is a shadow of herself, but her excitement returns when she learns that their boss is back. Thinking it might be Myulmang, she rushes to his office only to find her actual boss there. She runs into Parkyung, who has decided to continue writing because a weirdo has been tormenting him in his dreams. Dongkyung knows it's Myulmang and wonders what happened to him. Meanwhile, Myulmang also finds himself in an unfamiliar past with Shin, claiming she wants to teach him a lesson. There, he notices Dongkyung, who misses her interview because of a faulty bus. But Shin blames it all on Myulmang's existence, to remind him that his duty is to bring about doom. But the one that makes him snap is when she reminds him of Dongkyung's parents' death. After teaching him the lesson, she pulls him back to the present, and Myulmang is so angry that he shatters everything around him. However, Shin rewinds time and mocks him for delusionally believing that Dongkyung can love him after his very existence ruined her life. At the train station, Dongkyung is thinking about Myulmang when he suddenly appears across from her. She rushes over to see him and almost collapses because of her condition, but Myulmang catches her just in time. On the drive home, Dongkyung angrily questions him about his disappearance, but he refuses to answer. So she forces him to take her to his house because she didn't even know where to look for him after he vanished. There, Myulmang tells Dongkyung that he can't grant her wish nor fall in love with her. He then proposes halting everything, including living together, and before Dongkyung can protest, she finds herself back in her house. Meanwhile, Sungkyung finds Hyunkyu staring longingly at Gina's photo, and Hyunkyu admits she was his first love. After failing his college entrance exam, he lied to his friends that he was going abroad to save face. Gina heard the rumor and asked to meet, but he had Joik reply in his place. Joik dropped the conversation midway, leaving Gina to believe Hyunkyu had broken up with her and ghosted her. After hearing the story, Sungkyung scolds him for being a wuss, but Hyunkyu explains that he was too ashamed to face Gina because he liked her too much. Sungkyung then offers to be his love guru, so Hyunkyu takes him to the apartment, where he runs into Joik. Sungkyung recognizes him as Dongkyung's co-worker, but Joik is not happy that Hyunkyu brought a co-worker's family into his life. As they bond over drinks, Joik makes Sungkyung swear to keep his rich heir identity a secret. After their drinking session, Hyunkyu tells Joik about his encounter with Gina at the reunion. At the same time, Gina texts Joik to meet up, but he turns her down, which reminds her of the first time she met him. Back then, Joik met Gina crying in the rain while waiting for Hyunkyu. He offered her his umbrella and informed her that Hyunkyu had already traveled abroad. As she complained about all the things she didn't get to do with Hyunkyu as lovers, Joik suddenly kissed her out of pity. The following day, a writer named Dalgona informs Dongkyung that she's quitting because of terminal cancer. Later, at the company's dinner, only the creep, Jijo, shows up as a writer. He mocks Dalgona's condition even though Joik tries to stop him. Infuriated, Dongkyung snaps at him and reveals she also has cancer, with 3 months left to live. After her outburst, she storms out to look for Myulmang, but he doesn't show up. To force him out, she threatens to jump off the roof, but Myulmang still doesn't appear. However, as soon as she falls asleep, he appears and helps ease her pain. The following morning, Dongkyung is frustrated as she realizes he came while she was asleep, so she destroys the bracelet. Meanwhile, Gina breaks down at Dongkyung's office after hearing the news about her condition. Joik comforts her, and seeing she's a mess, he offers to drive her to see Dongkyung. On the way out, they almost run into Hyunkyu, but Joik stops Gina just in time. Meanwhile, Dongkyung is rushed to the hospital after collapsing, but all she can think about is Myulmang. Elsewhere, Shin visits Myulmang to check on him, but her words only force Myulmang to give up his decision to stay away from Dongkyung. A few moments later, he runs into her in the hospital hallway and quietly embraces her. Because even though his existence has caused Dongkyung a few dark times, her loved ones were always at the end of it to cheer her up. Myulmang then scolds Dongkyung for cutting her bracelet and promises to tell her everything about himself. And at the same time, the flower pot Shin has been carrying around finally sprouts a bud. Myulmang tells Dongkyung that his existence is the cause of all her misfortunes. But she lets him know that it's not his fault, but the one who made him. The next moment, Dongkyung vanishes, and Myulmang heads to her house only to find that she doesn't exist. Meanwhile, Dongkyung finds herself in a flower field with Shin, while Myulmang approaches Sungkyung and realizes no one remembers Dongkyung. Shin tells Dongkyung that she helped the bud grow because it's the first time he pitied someone other than himself. Myulmang visits the hospital but doesn't find Shin, while Dongkyung scolds her for making Myulmang miserable. Shin explains that she did it for Dongkyung's good, but Dongkyung refuses to leave her fate in the hands of some cuckoo deity who plays with people's emotions. Shortly after, Shin lets her go, as she only held her up to teach Myulmang a little lesson. The moment Dongkyung knocks on the door in the field, Myulmang finds her in his house and hugs her, relieved that she's back. Later, he tells her that what she visited was Shin's garden, and Dongkyung tells him about their discussion. Suddenly, Sungkyung bursts into Dongkyung's house only to find the bizarre sight of the merge between Myulmang's house. Dongkyung and Myulmang explain everything to him, but it takes a while for his dumb brain to process it. And when he does, Sungkyung fears Myulmang might be there to take his sister to the underworld. But Myulmang declares he plans to save her, and Sungkyung is ecstatic to hear this. But the next moment, Myulmang wipes his memory and knocks him out, and he wakes up in the hospital, oblivious of everything that transpired. Just then, Gina also arrives and ends up bawling her eyes out on the ride home. Later, Sungkyung and Gina try to convince Dongkyung to get surgery, but she refuses, and Myulmang then promises them that he can save her. Gina questions his identity, and Sungkyung assures her that Myulmang is a doctor and Dongkyung's boyfriend. Fed up with their bickering, Dongkyung sends them away, and Gina is stunned to learn that they live together. On their way out, Gina commends Sungkyung for taking on his sister's diagnosis like a champ and makes him promise to call her if an emergency comes up. As Myulmang gives Dongkyung another bracelet, she suggests they continue living together as usual. Unable to sleep, Myulmang goes out to see Shin and warns her to leave Dongkyung alone. Shin assures him that Dongkyung actually loves him, and she wishes their love could prove her wrong. But Myulmang knows that's just wishful thinking because Shin is always right. She then brings a dead flower back and hands it to him. The following day, Dongkyung's co-workers worry she might be in pain while she's busy chilling at home. She blushes when she sees Shin's flower, thinking Myulmang must have bought them for her. Later, she meets up with Dalgona, who hears about the messy company dinner and decides to quit the company after learning that Dongkyung resigned. She explains that she has decided to give surgery a try because there's a story she wants to write and turn into a drama for her favorite new actor, Park Young. It becomes clear that Dalgona is only telling Dongkyung all this to convince her to try surgery and live a little longer. On her way out, Dongkyung finds Myulmang waiting to take her home, and two lovebirds happily leave holding hands. Dongkyung wishes she could live to see the cherry blossoms in spring, and Myulmang instantly makes it happen. Dongkyung is so happy that she confesses her feelings for Myulmang. This leaves him speechless while she heads over to Gina's house for a sleepover. There, Dongkyung asks Gina to treat her like normal instead of walking on eggshells around her. Meanwhile, Hyunkyu asks Joik about the girl he was holding outside the coffee shop. Joik explains that she was just a writer, but Hyunkyu refuses to believe it because the look on his face gave it away that he liked her. Hyunkyu soon leaves to comfort Sungkyung, who is bawling his eyes out at a karaoke. Later, Joik goes to Gina's house only to meet Dongkyung, and she learns about their private contract. As she prepares to leave, Joik lets her know that he didn't accept her resignation, but Dongkyung has no intentions of returning to work. After she leaves, Joik is about to confess something to Gina when Hyunkyu shows up at her door. Meanwhile, Myulmang picks Dongkyung up on the road as usual, and the next moment, she finds herself in the past in a park she visited with her parents. Dongkyung then wishes that Myulmang could make her loved ones forget her when she dies. But he suddenly locks lips with her before she can finish. Later, he tells her to use her wish for herself and not for others. But Dongkyung reminds him that she already used her wish for herself when she asked him to fall in love with her, but it didn't work. However, Myulmang hints that she doesn't need a wish for that to happen. Suddenly, Dongkyung bumps into a woman, only to realize it's her mother, and she also sees her father because it was the same day they all came to the park together. Before Dongkyung can follow them, the past vanishes, but Dongkyung is still happy she could see her parents one more time. Myulmang then tells her that it's okay for her to like him, and she doesn't need a wish to make him like her. But before she can respond, Dongkyung is stunned to find her aunt, Suja, in front of the house. Watching Dongkyung, Myulmang is reminded of how much he wanted to be human. However, he soon gave up that idea because everything about them always came to an end while he watched helplessly. This time, he hopes Dongkyung can be selfish and choose herself for once. Meanwhile, Dongkyung bolts, realizing she's in deep trouble, and Suja chases after her. Meanwhile, Gina shuts the door in Hyunkyu's face and tells him to wait for her downstairs. Before Joik can say anything, Gina apologizes and rushes out to meet Hyunkyu in a cafe. There, he tells her that he came back because he missed her. But Gina is not happy to hear this. Before they broke up, he avoided her instead of talking things out and expected her to wait for him despite ignoring her messages. After pouring out her heart, Gina informs him that she has no intention of going back to the past, and as she leaves, Hyunkyu lets her know that he still likes her, but Gina ignores him. Meanwhile, Suja catches up with Dongkyung, and she tries to grill Myulmang since Sunkyung has filled her in on all the deets. But Dongkyung hurriedly sends him away and hands him her phone for communication. After he leaves, Dongkyung apologizes for hiding her illness while Suja comforts her. Meanwhile, Hyunkyu returns home to find a message on Joik's phone, but before he can check it, Joik interrupts him. Later, Dongkyung calls Myulmang to thank him for helping her see her parents again. The following day, she makes him disguise himself as a doctor for a consultation with Suja to give her a little hope so that she can stop worrying. After the meeting, Dongkyung finally buys Myulmang his very own cell phone. Myulmang then takes her to an old school, about to be closed down, where he disguises himself as an old teacher sending off his last student. Dongkyung then asks about Shin, and Myulmang explains that she's always born sick and eventually dies in every lifetime, which is the way she maintains the world. This makes Dongkyung wish the world could be a peaceful place without needing such a sacrifice. To comfort Dongkyung, Myulmang stops time for a split second, telling her that nothing in the world was destroyed in that second. Elsewhere, Suja and her Canadian husband visit her sister's resting place. The following day, Dongkyung drags Myulmang out to splurge on shopping, but she quickly realizes that she's not one of the Kardashians and settles for a smaller haul. She then uses her illness as a pass to snatch a bag from another customer. Later, they stop by a photo studio to take a few shots, and Dongkyung uses it as Myulmang's screensaver. That night, he takes her on an expensive date in her dreams because, apparently, in dreams, anyone can be a Jeff Bezos. But like any proper baddie, Dongkyung wishes they could do it in real life. However, she changes her mind when her loved ones arrive, wearing the gifts she bought for them. The following morning, Dongkyung is happy as she wakes up to see everyone in her house except for Myulmang, who goes to the hospital to visit Shin. He tells her that he'll follow her lead instead of looking for ways to destroy the world. Before leaving, Myulmang thanks her for creating him and lets her know that he feels sorry that she always has to suffer. Unbeknownst to him, Shin is bleeding profusely but doesn't want him to see her like that. Meanwhile, Dongkyung's old boss, Changshin, blows hot when he learns that Gina has refused to work with anyone except Dongkyung. He tells his employees to cancel Gina's contract since she's not even that popular. But his smugness vanishes when he learns that several other writers are also threatening to quit, including their moneybag, Parkyung. He begs Joik to handle it, but Joik coldly tells him to clean up his own mess. Even the rest of the employees refuse to help, leaving Changshin in a dilemma. Later, Joik realizes that Hyunkyu has seen Gina's message and goes to the cafe to speak to him, but his father interrupts them, and Changshin almost discovers that Joik is some rich heir, but Hyunkyu handles it, giving Joik time to escape. At that moment, Hyunkyu realizes that Gina was the girl Joik was hiding from him. Later, he confronts Joik about it and leaves to see Gina before Joik can explain. When Hyunkyu finds Gina, he suddenly asks if she likes someone, but before she can respond, he tells her to get back together with him. Elsewhere, Myulmang meets with Dongkyung for her daily recharge, and she asks if he can save her if she makes a wish to stay alive. But Myulmang says it's not possible because his job is to destroy. But he reminds her that she can just love him to the point where he can be her replacement in death. However, Dongkyung is not happy to hear this. As soon as she leaves, Myulmang realizes that he's becoming more human and is too scared to lose Dongkyung, so he chases after her. When they finally meet, Myulmang tells Dongkyung that he has fallen in love with her. Dongkyung is surprised to hear this and instantly proposes they start dating, leaving Myulmang stunned. Meanwhile, Gina doesn't reject Hyunkyu outright but playfully leaves things hopeful. The following day, Dongkyung tells Gina about her updated relationship status while Jean tells her about Hyunkyu's proposal. Gina explains that she crumbled the moment she saw him and couldn't reject him. Later, Dongkyung shows up at Myulmang's house, acting like a nun, forgetting they've done almost everything when they were not dating. Elsewhere, Gina meets up with the creep Jijo, who accuses her of plagiarizing his work. He starts hitting on her, but Gina snaps at him as Joik and the other employees arrive to mediate. Fed up with Jijo's constant attitude, Joik roasts him for always writing trash. While the world is in chaos, Dongkyung and Myulmang enjoy a lover's stroll. When Dongkyung asks about his lonesome garden, Myulmang tells her that it's different because of her. After he walks her home, she flirts with him, inviting him to eat ramen. To her surprise, Myulmang accepts the invitation, but their plans to roll in the sheets are ruined when they find a full house. Myulmang joins them and introduces himself as Saram, a name that Dongkyung gave him, which simply means human. Suja heads back inside and breaks down when she sees Dongkyung's memorial photo, and Dongkyung gets emotional when she sees her. As soon as they come out, Myulmang is the only one who notices their sadness. And after the dinner, he urges Dongkyung to express her feelings instead of burying them, but she ignores him and heads back home. Meanwhile, Hyunkyu returns home and tells Joik that he already asked Gina out. But Joik simply apologizes for not telling him that he knows Gina. The following day, Dongkyung visits Shin and comforts her for carrying such a burden on her tiny shoulders. As Dongkyung prepares to leave, Shin tells her to love and live her life well. Later, Dr. Sungjun invites Dongkyung to his wedding in 3 months, hoping to give her one more reason to live on. Myulmang then picks her up for her next appointment with Yeji, her co-worker. Yeji sympathizes with Dongkyung, and soon, Dain and Jungmin join them. Jungmin almost hugs Dongkyung, but Dain stops him before Myulmang erases him with his glare. After the meeting, he hurries Dongkyung to leave, and she scolds him for acting like a guard dog. Next, she meets up with Parkyung and asks for his autograph, making him wonder if she has feelings for him. But Dongkyung explains that it's for Dalgona. He also signs an autograph on Dongkyung's hand, wishing her to recover soon. Dongkyung then asks for his opinion on what a protagonist should do if loving someone could bring about the world's destruction, or if choosing to save the world would mean losing the person they love. Parkyung tells her that the only way to achieve a happy ending for everyone is for the protagonist to give up on love entirely. After the meeting, Parkyung asks about Myulmang, who's been glaring at him the entire time, and Dongkyung reveals that he's her boyfriend. On his way out, Myulmang nearly trips him out of pure jealousy. Later, Dongkyung visits Dalgona, who is over the moon after receiving Parkyung's autograph. When Dalgona asks about her life, Dongkyung admits she's having a lot of fun. She then meets up with Myulmang, who suddenly suggests they get married. Caught off guard, she playfully teases him for skipping 10 steps before taking him to visit her parents at the columbarium. Later, she buys a cake to celebrate Myulmang's birthday and promises to fulfill his wish as long as he doesn't ask for marriage. Myulmang tells her that his wish is for her to live, and Dongkyung assures him that she already feels alive thanks to him. That night, Dongkyung ticks off her bucket list while Myulmang wonders why she's been acting like someone preparing to disappear. Elsewhere, Joik meets up with Gina, but Hyunkyu calls her before he can ask her about him. Joik begs her to listen to him before she answers Hyunkyu's call. He then reveals that he lives with Hyunkyu and lied about him going abroad the day she came to look for him. Apparently, after the kiss that day, Joik stopped Hyunkyu from leaving the building to avoid running into Gina. He also admits that he did it on purpose to help her move on and admits that he doesn't regret it. However, he wants to bow out because he's beginning to feel bad, which he doesn't like. Meanwhile, Dongkyung prepares to leave as the last thing on her bucket list is to break up with Myulmang. She tries to live quietly, but runs into Myulmang, who reveals he figured it out just from observing her earlier. Dongkyung then breaks up with him and promises to try to forget him and everyone else in her life. She apologizes for falling in love with him, and her words move even his cold heart to tears. But Dongkyung refuses to stay and even leaves her bracelet behind. She returns to her hometown, determined to spend her remaining days reliving old memories. But the following night, Myulmang appears to help her through the pain, but Dongkyung pushes him away. Unwilling to give up, he urges her to stop bottling everything up and express how she truly feels. And for the first time in a long while, Dongkyung breaks down in tears, confessing that she wants to live and spend more time with him and her loved ones. Myulmang pulls her into an embrace, admitting that he, too, wants to live and ultimately die by her side. Thanks for watching till the end. And make sure to comment Doomsday to find out whether Dongkyung can defy her doomed fate.